and welcome everyone to a very special edition of Derek's Travel Chats. Today, we'll talk a little bit about travel and some things. Today, I have the pleasure of having retired General Rick Hillier, who's very familiar to everyone here in Newfoundland, being a proud Newfoundlander himself. Is here to talk about the Victoria Cross and medals of distinction that he is now working to, I guess, get the government to begin to recognize some of our heroes of the military. As I say, Rick is a fellow Newfoundlander, born in central Newfoundland, Hamilton. Is that correct, Rick?
Yes, it is.
And went to university at Memorial University, and eventually became the Chancellor of the university back in 2003.
There were a lot of years between those two things, Derek. Between going there and becoming Chancellor, a lot of years, sadly.
Yeah. So Rick has had General Rick Hillier has had a great career, and then became the Chief of Staff for our military, and a very distinguished Chief of Staff at that. So welcome to the show.
Thanks,
It is a pleasure to have you with us, and I know we became very acquainted with each other because you came on the Beaumont Hamill Freedom 100 Tour back in 2016, and we're part of the 100th anniversary celebrations or commemoration over at Beaumont Hamill, and we got to meet your lovely wife Joyce and other members of your family during that time. And so Rick, can you explain to our viewers exactly what your campaign with the Victoria Cross is for today?
Well, Derek, I can. And so, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. And yeah, you know, we were on the Beaumont Hamill 100th anniversary tour with you and Trafalgar, Canada. My wife Joyce, myself, and three of my sisters. And what an incredible tour! What an incredible, I think, 8 or 9 days that was. And we got to visit not only Beaumont Hamill, but Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele and Meningate in Ypres in Belgium, and Dieppe, of course, the beaches of Dieppe, and then the beaches of Normandy and the Juno Beach Center and Benny-sur-Mer Cemetery, where so many incredible young Canadians are buried, and that's their final resting spot. But at Beaumont Hamill, that day of the 100th anniversary, we got a chance to see what, you know, true leadership and true heroism was. And as we heard the stories and stood on the ground, the very ground that those Newfoundlanders got up from, where they had dug into that ground. They got up from the rear row of trenches. They advanced on the high ground because the trenches that would have taken them to the forward lines were filled with the dead and dying from attacks earlier in the morning by a British regiment. And then they got tangled in the barbed wire, shelled by artillery, fired at by machine guns and snipers, and the vast majority of the 801 died. And we got to talk about. We actually, I think, got to feel their heroism, their loyalty, father to son, son to father, brothers to each other, but battle buddies, blood brothers to each other in a very real way. And I think that's where some of the inspiration for what we're trying to do now comes, is that we want to make sure that Canada does the best possible job of recognizing our sons and daughters who serve in the military. And specifically, we go to Afghanistan and the war that was fought there. I was Chief of Defense Staff from 2005 to 2008, and that incredibly proud time to represent our men and women in uniform to the rest of Canada. It was also the toughest time in the war in Afghanistan, and we lost a lot of incredible young soldiers. We saw some incredible heroes, every one of them a hero, some more heroic than others. And some of those more heroic were awarded the Star of Military Valor, 25 of them. And that's our second highest award for valor and for bravery in the presence of an enemy in the Canadian Forces in Canada. Not one, however, was awarded the Canadian Victoria Cross. And we've not had the award of a Victoria Cross since World War II. We've had 99 awarded to Canadians, during our history. But in 1993, the Canadian government decided on behalf of Canadians that we should celebrate our own. And we therefore produced the Canadian Victoria Cross. We've made 10 of them. They rest in security in the Canadian Mint, and they're there to award, to recognize Canadians in our own unique way, except we've not done it. And we think that, now looking back on the combat in Afghanistan, looking back on what occurred there and reading the citations, many of whom I know, of course, the men in those citations, reading their citations about the courage they displayed, the incredible service and sacrifice they gave our country, they gave all of us, including me. We think that maybe we undershot during that time. And one of those, at least, perhaps more than one, should have been awarded the Canadian Victoria Cross because of their incredible valor in the presence of an enemy. Australia awarded Victoria Crosses. New Zealand awarded one. The United Kingdom awarded Victoria Crosses. The United States of America awarded Medals of Honor. And if you compare the bravery, the courage, the actions during those moments that led to those awards, many of our citations are equivalent to that. And so what we want to do is produce a TV special, 2 hours long, air it next Remembrance Day, and tell the stories of 10 of those incredible soldiers who won the Star of Military Valor for their courage, and interview the people that were with them at the time, their commanders who knew what occurred, and go through the citation and pose the question, do Canadians believe that one or more of these should actually be awarded the Canadian Victoria Cross, and cause our government to reset and say to the armed forces, relook the citations, and if there is one that does meet that criteria for valor in the presence of an enemy, bring it forward to the government Honors and Awards Committee, and we'll see about awarding the Canadian Victoria Cross. So we want to tell those stories, and we want to actually kind of force a bit of a reassessment of what occurred in those citations.
Are there any of those stories that you can give a little snippets about today?
Well, Derek, first of all, I could tell stories about Canadian heroes for hours and hours and hours, from the ones back in World War I or the Boer War in 1900 to World War II to Korea to in fact now. But, I'll just give you the one example of Private Jess LaRochelle. Just a young boy, really, doing a man's job, doing an adult's job without question. And in the fall of 2006, he was in his defensive position with several other soldiers on the flank of one of our rifle companies that was preparing for operations. And their job was to secure the flank in case the enemy attacked. All of a sudden, that defensive position got hit by a whole bunch of rocket-propelled grenades and essentially destroyed. Several of the soldiers were killed. Others were wounded. Jess was wounded, although he did not know it at the time. And that was followed immediately by an attack of about a platoon of Taliban. Jess got his machine gun going and brought fire to bear on those attacking enemy. He kept them from overrunning the company on that flank. He got rocket launchers, single-use rocket launchers, we call them the M72, and fired at them, got the machine gun going again, and held off that enemy platoon, that enemy attack on the flank. And if it had succeeded, we would have lost, most likely we would have lost a lot of young Canadian men and women in that company, because that was the only defense on that flank. The company commander said he rushed up that slope with several others to reinforce it, to make sure it wasn't going to fail. And he said when he saw the defensive position, he thought, oh my goodness, they're all dead inside of that. And then all of a sudden he could hear the machine gun going, and they got in, and there was this young boy. I think he was 19 years old at the time, just a small man, incredible good-looking kid. And there he was on the machine gun, still bringing fire to bear, firing rocket launchers at the enemy, and held that flank. Then when the enemy attack finished, because of his fire, the company commander reinforced that position. Jess helped carry his battle brothers to the helicopter so they could be evacuated. And then just after that collapsed because he had a vertebrae broken in his back because of one of the rocket propelled grenades that had detonated around him. And then that haunted him to the rest of his life. That's one of the individuals out of those 10 stories that we'd like to tell who were awarded the Star of Military Valor for courage. And I just ask you, doesn't that story alone just say that's valor in the face of the enemy? Fought the enemy, looked after his buddies, did not give up, did it on his own until he got reinforced by his company commander. And only after everything was stable and safe that he collapsed from his wound and be medevaced himself. Doesn't that speak to you of a Victoria Cross?
Yeah, I mean, just the hair standing on my arms now, just thinking about what these men and women would put themselves through. You know, we talk about World War I, World War II, and you know, all of us are probably, you know, don't know a lot about the Afghanistan war and the Gulf Wars and some of the even some of the peacekeeping missions. I'm sure of what our we call our, I guess, our modern day soldiers, modern day veterans,
Yep.
have seen and done over the years. So yeah, I mean, that's just a truly amazing story, and I'm sure the other 9 are just as amazing. And probably, you know, maybe we should, well, not for me to say, but maybe those 10 Victoria Crosses maybe all used up if we look at it deeply enough, you know. So
Derek, it's not for me to say either, but I think it is for somebody to say we should do a reassessment. You know, and look, I take the blame, in fact, for the fact that perhaps we didn't have a Canadian Victoria Cross awarded, because as the Chief of Defence, I chaired the Canadian Forces Honors and Awards Boards, and we put the citations forward. But you know, we were all new at going to war. The young soldiers in combat were learning what they had to do. The senior commanders like myself were learning our positions and what we had to do. Our political leaders were learning how to use things to achieve their good common purposes. The journalists that covered us were learning how to cover a war again for the first time really since the Second World War. So I don't think we understood all of what was needed for those citations. I think secondly, we had to recognize that, you know, getting citations written and the documentary evidence to go with it when you're in war is very difficult. Then you can understand why, right? I mean, this action occurred, I think it was October of 2006 with Jess La Rochelle, and you know, that battle group did not rotate home until February, March of the following spring, and they were in combat in action pretty much the entire time. And so to say to the commanders and the people around this young soldier and others that, hey, we need a citation, we need all the documentary evidence, that's really hard to do when you're out there fighting for your life. And so there's a reason for that. But the third thing I'd say, I think is part of the reason, and I take a lot of responsibility for this, and I admit it, is that, you know, we were perhaps saving ourselves for the best citation, which we never did see. You know, we were kind of like the French figure skating judge that was infamous during the Olympics some years ago, who kept their points from Canadians who had skated so wonderfully, who had kept their points from them and wanted to use them for our own countrymen when they skated. And we were kind of like that. You know, we were saving that ultimate award for valor for the right citation, and we never did see it. And maybe we should have looked at what we had perhaps a little more carefully. And that's what I'm saying. Let's just reassess this, and maybe we'll come back and say no, it's not deserved. Star of Military Valor was most appropriate. I don't believe that, but let's have a reassessment.
Sure. I know. Well, I mean, for Newfoundland, as far as Newfoundland history is concerned, we have Tommy Ricketts. He received the Victoria Cross from the British Army. Is that correct?
Well, he received the British Empire, the Victoria Cross from the British Empire, which was what we had till 1993, and Newfoundland obviously till 1949. And you know, when I looked at Jess La Rochelle, and I got to know him pretty well in the next year or so, he's just a fine young man, and he's having some incredible difficulties in life now as a consequence of what he went through, without question. When I looked at young Jess La Rochelle, who was, I said, I think he was 19, he may have been 20, but he looked about 13 years old. And when I looked at him, Sergeant Tommy Ricketts flashed through my mind, because for those who don't know the story, you know, Tommy Ricketts in the early fall of 1918 with the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was incredibly valorous in the face of the enemy over an extended period of time, and was awarded the Victoria Cross. He was 17 years old at the time when he was awarded the Victoria Cross, for valor in the presence of the enemy. He was 17. He probably didn't look more than about 13 or 14 years old. And he was the youngest person in the British land forces. In the British Empire land forces, he was the youngest person to ever win the Victoria Cross. He won it in 1918 at 17 years of age. He had already been fighting with the regiment for 2 years. He was one of those young men who lied about their age, who went to join the regiment. Recruiters perhaps didn't ask quite as many questions then, or didn't demand the kind of proof that we would now of age, because in many cases, obviously, it wasn't available. And he joined the regiment and fought with the regiment from the age of 15 onwards, won the Victoria Cross at age 17, and came back to Newfoundland, of course, to live a full and complete life. And if I recall, he was a pharmacist in
downtown St. John. Yeah.
And what a legacy to leave to Newfoundlanders serving in the military. You know, one of the things I did when I became Chief of Defense Staff, we had a long corridor leading from the elevators to where the offices were. And we had a lot of visitors that would come to those offices and for meetings and to walk through things. And we wanted to make sure that we made the right impression. So the team that was with me, that we got the citations of all the Victoria Cross winners from Canada with their picture. We got them all framed identically, and we got them all put along that corridor leading to the office. And every time we get somebody, you know, that we wanted to make an impression on of what we as uniformed men and women did, what our sons and daughters in uniform did, I would meet them at the elevators. And let's say it was the Prime Minister or the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from the United States of America. I'd meet them at the elevator, and I'd walk along that corridor with them towards the offices, and I'd say, you know, hey, these are our heroes right here. And I'd stop and we'd go through one of the citations. And I would say 50% of the time, the one I stopped at was Sergeant Tommy Ricketts. Okay, so I'm guilty. I'm a Newfoundlander. I was very proud of him. I was proud of every one of them, but I was very proud of Tommy Ricketts too. So we made an impression on those people. You know, 100 years later, we're still getting served by those incredible people who came before us.
Yeah. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago, not while we were on our tour, but probably about 2 years afterwards, I had another small group of people over, and we went to the Tommy Ricketts monument in Belgium. And I must say, you know, I congratulate the people who own the farm that it's on for allowing people to come and just come and visit their property and be able to take pictures alongside the monument. I must say it was very impressive, and can't wait to go back there again with more people. So,
you know, Derek, we just went through Remembrance Day, and I'm hoping that everybody who's watching did something. Just because we have a pandemic doesn't mean you can't remember, can't appreciate, can't say thank you to those who helped build this awesome country that we call home, and gave us the freedoms that we have and the stability that we have, and in fact gifted us with this incredible gift of a nation that's peaceful and serene and beautiful, and that we love and call home. And when you go along the border of northern France into Belgium, you see just what that cost was. And I know we're in pandemic and travel is pretty much at a standstill, but once we get back to where you can travel safely, like, I just encourage people to go to those battlefields. Across that stretch of about 2 hours drive, there are 3,200 British Commonwealth war cemeteries. 3,200. Some of them are relatively small, with, you know, several hundred graves of soldiers who died. And then there are ones, the bigger ones like Tynecott, up near Passchendaele, with more than 11,000 graves and the names of 35,000 people on the walls around that cemetery who have no known grave. And also the final resting spot for a Canadian Victoria Cross winner, also Lieutenant Pete Robertson, known as Whistling Pete, for his happy-go-lucky life and the incredible valor that he displayed, inspires us still. But it's such an incredible thing. The loss was so great, and if we forget that, that would be tragic. It would be criminal. And so I encourage people to remember, and I encourage people to travel there at first opportunity. I've been there dozens of times. Every time I go, it's emotional, it's inspirational. I grow a foot taller because I'm standing on the shoulders of those giants who came before us so long ago. And I realize what we owe them, because they gave us this country that we live in, that we love, and that we call home.
one of the things that when you were on the tour with me, a place that we stopped, and as a Canadian, to be quite honest, I wasn't aware of this particular location and what took place there. But can you share the story of the Ardennes Abbey with our?
Yeah, well, you're talking about the Abbey Ardennes up near the beaches of Normandy, and
Yeah,
it's a beautiful old establishment with a chateau and cathedral, I guess, and it was a monastery in times past. I'm not sure if it still is active or not. When on D-Day, on the 6th of June, 1944, of course, the Allied troops went ashore, and the Canadian Division went ashore. 3rd Canadian Division went ashore with 2 extra brigades. Went ashore on Juno Beach and fought on 6th June and all the way through. It's quite incredible. We don't even know the incredible stories of heroism that took place that day and days after that. We all know about Omaha Beach because the Americans tell their stories well through Hollywood, and Saving Private Ryan and The Longest Day. Those were incredible. We haven't told our stories. And just as one example, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles had as tough a day on their beach. I think it was Nancy Green Beach in Juno Beach. They had as tough a day as the U.S. Division, 29th Division with 116th Regiment went ashore on Omaha, and yet they prevailed and they kept going. And then the night of 7 June, as the units are advancing, one of the regiments from Nova Scotia in particular had some soldiers who were captured by the Germans, and several other units had soldiers in that same area. And the difference was one road. On one side of the road, they were captured by 10th SS Panzer Division, and that was Panzer Meyer, who was their commander. So they were taken by SS troopers. On the other side, it was a regular German army unit. The ones on the other side, captured by the regular German army unit, went into prisoner of war camps and were released by and large after the war. Most of them survived. The ones on the right, in several groupings when they were captured, were beaten from the start. They were taken to Abbey Ardennes, which was very close, and it was where, in fact, the regimental commander used it as an observation post to try and see the Canadians moving up from the beach. There at the Abbey Ardennes, they were pushed up against the wall. They were beaten, and they were sitting down. And then they were taken around to the back garden in the Abbey Ardennes, one at a time. And there, some of them were beaten to death with shovels or pickaxes. And then, as one after the other went, some of them were killed were murdered by pistol or rifle fire. And I think the number is 23 Canadian soldiers that were murdered there. Kurt Meyer, who was the regimental commander there, was tried and found guilty after the war of that murder. He served a very short period of time in jail in Dorchester, New Brunswick, actually, and then was released in 1955 and went back to Germany to become a beer salesman. When we go there, we always try to do something that's very, very specific. And Terry Kopp, a great military historian, started doing this, and he would bring a little bag of wet maple leaves. And we'd read out the name of each soldier that was there and that was murdered there, and where they were from. A lot of them were from Nova Scotia, up near Pictou County, because that's where that unit was from, Stellarton and Pictou County. And we'd read out that soldier's name, their age, if our voices could carry it, and where they were from, and then we'd lay a little maple leaf on the memorial there just to say, we remember you and we remember that sacrifice. There are always prisoners. When they're taken prisoner of war, there are always people who are killed, sometimes accidentally, and sometimes it happens when you're close up into the battle and into the firefight and the bloodlust is up. That happens. But this case, they were away from the firefight. They had now been taken back. There are hours and hours gone by since they've been taken prisoner. They're now back in a place where their headquarters is, so it's quiet and calm there. There is no reason whatsoever. That was pure murder. Sadly, most Canadians don't know about these kinds of things and can't therefore say, we remember, thank you, we'll never forget.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story, and one, like I said, one I had never heard before and was not aware of. But every time I've been in that area, I make sure that I go to that abbey now to pay my respects to the men who were basically executed there.
Yeah, I do the same, Derek. And as I mentioned about going there to the battlefields and Menin Gate, every time I go there, it's so emotional. These are young men and boys, really, that were serving us, and they paid a horrible price for it. Their families were changed forever, and it didn't have to happen.
And just lastly, before we conclude, can you give our viewers? I mean, I've talked about the feeling, and you mentioned it at the beginning, you know, about Beaumont Hamill and the Trail of the Caribou and the feeling that every time you go there. Can you give the viewers just a little bit more sense of how, you know, the pride and that kind of thing that when we do the Trail of the Caribou, whether it's in Belgium or in, you know, Monchy or wherever, you know, what that's all about and what that means to you as a Newfoundlander and as a Canadian?
Well, I would simply say this, Derek. As a Newfoundlander, this is personal, because you know the families, the names of everyone who fought there, and so many who died there and whose bodies did not come back. In many cases, so many whose bodies were never found. And you look at all the names on the memorial at Beaumont Hamill, as we call it in Newfoundland, and those are all the names of soldiers whose bodies were never found, sons of Newfoundland. And the names are all so common, and we know them all. So it's personal to start with. And then you go look at the battlefields, whether it's Masnier or Monchy-le-Preux, where really the regiment or a part of the regiment faced down almost a German division. I mean, the odds were overwhelming, and the bravery and courage was incredible. But you go to Beaumont Hamill, and something that has marked Newfoundland. I mean, at Beaumont Hamill on the 1st of July, 1916, we lost the leadership of Newfoundland for the next 50 to 60 years. Because they were all the first 500 plus others who had joined later. They were primarily the sons of the leading citizens of the province or the Dominion at the time. They were the sons of the businessmen or the politicians, the political leaders, and they would have been logically the leaders of that next generation. And on the 1st of July, 1916, they died. And so we had some tough times, you know, the Great Depression, the influenza pandemic, of course, the Great Depression, the fail of the cod fishery, bankruptcy in Newfoundland, World War II, and then a debate as to what we would do for the future. And we did all of that without the kind of leadership that we could have had if those sons of Newfoundland had survived and had not died at Beaumont Hamill and the other places of the Caribou. But when you go there and you walk that ground, and as the young guide will tell you, and there always seems to be at least one Newfoundland guide with the Parks Canada team at Beaumont Hamill, as she was telling us the last time I was there, you know, out in that field in front of us, and it's only a couple of acres, out in that field in front of us are the bodies of, you know, 2 to 250 sons of Newfoundland. And one of those is my great uncle, she said. You say, oh my goodness, this is up close and personal to us. And you think about, there's some video from Beaumont Hamill in that time and of the men going forward, and the machine gun fire and the artillery fire was so intense that they were walking bent over with their chin tucked in their shoulder, almost as if you walk into a blizzard. And that blizzard, though, was a blizzard of steel and explosions coming at them. And when you're there, this is Newfoundland. I'll finish off, Derek. I know you got other things to talk about. I'll finish off by saying I was there for the 90th anniversary of Beaumont Hamill, and I was there for the 100th anniversary with you. And the 90th anniversary in particular was superbly done by the government of Canada and the government of Newfoundland and Labrador. And so we were there. I was the chief of defense staff at the 90th anniversary. And when we went there, my wife and I, you know, Newfoundland was there. Our premier was there. The lieutenant governor was there. The chancellor of the university and president were there. That university that was established to be a living monument through education to the men who had died at Beaumont Hamill and elsewhere. I was there. The Royal Newfoundland regiments, both battalions were represented there with guards, Newfoundlanders galore, and the band of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And one little thing, it just got me so emotional, and I keep reflecting back to it. the night prior, on the night of 30 June, of course, this is when the daylight is, extensive till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. We had a formal mess dinner, we call it in the military, in a tent that was about 100 yards from the Caribou Monument. And the side of the tent that was facing towards the monument was all clear plastic. And we were all in mess dress with medals on, et cetera, having our dinner. And as the sun was setting, we could just see that caribou, the monument silhouetted. And it was just absolutely wonderful. And then the band of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment started playing all those Newfoundland songs, let me fish off Cape St. Mary's and Gray Foggy Day and oh my goodness, it was emotional. I remember looking out over that battlefield again, where so many of our sons, their bodies still rest.
Yeah.
And I remember wondering, do they know we're here? Do they know that we're here to say, 90 years later, to say thank you to them and to make sure they're not forgotten, to repeat their names. And every time I go to that memorial, I repeat the names that I see there just to make sure their name is still spoken. It's very personal for us Newfoundlanders. We hope to see a 6th caribou at Gallipoli to complete that trail of the caribou in the not too distant future. And I look forward to going there when it is put there and to be there when it's dedicated. Thanks very much, Derek, for the opportunity to go on about that.
No, you're more than welcome. I know. So hopefully in June, July of 2021, for our viewers, I've been working with retired Major Michael Pretty, who's a historian for the Trail of the Caribou Research Group. And Michael has been pretty well to every Newfoundlander's grave site and marked and has it marked and has a GPS marking for it. So if you have anyone has any connection or has a relative that was that they know is buried there, Michael will be able to help, and he will be coming with us on the tour, hopefully in 2021 to mark the 105 anniversary. And we will be very concentrated on just the Trail of the Caribou and Tommy Ricketts and Meningate, and we will go to Bimini as a Canadian because it's right next door. But we will also be hopefully adding an add-on to go over to Turkey and Gallipoli, because we're not sure exactly when, but it was, they sort of kind of indicated that possibly the caribou would be in place by February or March of this year. And if we can go over, it may not be the dedication ceremony, but hopefully we could get over to see it. So if people are interested in that, hopefully they will contact us and we can and do that. But just so
Derek, I've talked about the people who died there and the bodies there. For anybody who's got a relative, no matter how distant, who fought in World War I or indeed in World War II, and who is buried there or his name is on a monument because the body wasn't found, it's almost a part of the circle of life to go and visit that grave. And Derek was with my wife and my 3 sisters when we went to visit the grave of my great uncle, John Clark from Campbellton, Newfoundland, who was killed on the 14th of August, 1917, up in Belgium, at the front end of the Battle of Passchendaele, where the Royal Newfoundland Regiment really was there at the front end of it. And he had joined the regiment in March of 1917, went to Nova Scotia, did some training, went to England, did some training, and then joined the regiment, fought in the early part of July, and then came out of the lines, went back into the lines in early August, was wounded by artillery fire, I think on the 12th of August, and then died in the medical station very close to Dozinam, Belgium, Dozinam Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery, and was buried right there. And we went to visit his grave, and oh my goodness, it was so emotional as to be unbelievable. My dad used to tell us about John Clark, Uncle John Clark, my great Uncle John Clark, almost every single day. I think it was his way of remembering. And all of a sudden here, me and my wife and 3 of my sisters were at his grave, and of this boy, 20 years old. This boy, 20 years old. And we still remembered him. He still shaped our life to a certain extent, right? Because we had heard about him so much, and we knew that he was part of our family. And I would just say to people, if you have somebody there in particular, it is almost a closing of the circle of life to be able to go and visit them and just remind them, and I visit with them when I go, just remind them they're not forgotten.
I don't know if you recall, we also went to one site, Mrs. Spurl was with us, and she visited an uncle, I believe it was an uncle of hers, and she was the first family member to ever stand in front of his headstone, which was very emotional as well I know, for everybody who was with her on that particular day, to know that took place. So there are so many things that we could happen, and I've said to you, I personally think a visit to the Trail of the Caribou should almost be part of the curriculum for schools in Newfoundland. That everyone at some point should be able to. We should be able to get students over there, because there's no better learning to be actually on that site to learn about.
And Derek, you're right. I don't think we do a very good job in our education system of teaching our own history and what's so important about it. And these men and women who shaped our country, who gave us a stage on the world stage, who gave us the confidence to carry forward in the new century, and who gave us the leadership, those who came back, because, hey, if you had survived the mud of Passchendaele, there was nothing you couldn't do when you came back here to Newfoundland, or indeed came back to Canada if you were with the Canadian Corps there. And they gave us this confidence that, hey, we belonged on that world stage, and we could do anything. That's helped us build the country that we have. And so to be able to go there, our education system doesn't do that for us. It doesn't tell us how this nation was built. And to be able to send kids there or have them go would be incredible. As a Canadian soldier and the Canadian Chief of Defense Staff, I'd have to say you would have to include Dieppe, and you would have to include Vimy, and you would have to include Normandy and the beaches there, because so much of our nation and our leaders were formed there, who came back in the period following Vimy and World War I and the period following World War II, and gave us this great society that treats us so well now.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, last year with the 75th anniversary in 2019 of D-Day, and then we followed the path of the Canadian troops right up to Amsterdam and Holland, and also marking the liberation of Holland and so on. So, and again, going to those Canadian sites and Dunkirk, and just understanding that particular, how all of those, as you say, shaped our country for what it is today. And I really think that, both on Newfoundland students and Canadian students really need to visit those sites and understand exactly what sacrifice was made for us to be here today, talking as we are today.
Well, and Derek, well, we can all learn from it, not just young students. And so,
True.
Here we are now in the middle of a pandemic, and it's been 8-9 months, and there's no sign it's going to get any better in the foreseeable future. And we can all hope, but we know it's going to be a long while yet. And people are getting stressed, and people are having great difficulty. And a lot of people are starting to believe less and less that they can handle this, that they can stay isolated and keep their distance from people, because it's abnormal for us, and particularly Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, it's abnormal for us not to be close into people all of it. And you go to a place like Dieppe and see what Canadian soldiers did that day, and how Padre John Foote, a quiet, mild-mannered individual, did with incredible courage under fire to save our wounded soldiers, and then elect to stay to go into a prisoner of war camp with 2,000 soldiers who were taken prisoner of war, because he knew they needed him more than the soldiers back in England needed him. And for that, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. When you go to Dieppe, you go to Beaumont, Hamill, go to Vimy Ridge, and you see what they did, and the fear and the stress and the danger, and obviously the loss. And you say, something, they were asked to assault that beach under fire. I'm asked to sit at home on my Chesterfield. I got this. I can do this. So there are things we can draw from now that can inspire us even now during this pandemic.
I agree with you 100%. So thank you very much for explaining your campaign for the Victoria Cross, and is there anywhere that people can, write for, giving you support, or what would you like people to do with regard?
We have a Facebook site up, Valor in the Presence of the Enemy, and we're right at the starting gates here, so we're still shaping ourselves, but you can keep in touch on that Facebook site. We're gonna feed into that site and Twitter and YouTube with the same name, Valor in the Presence of the Enemy. What's happening, where we are, and we've got a great idea. We believe it's a noble effort. We believe, and what we have is no money. So at some point in time, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to produce this thing, and that's what we're working at right now. We're trying to figure out how we produce it. Is it with a network? Is it with several networks? Is it with the support of foundations or individual people? Or is it going to be something internet-based? We're not sure yet. We want to do all of that because we think the stories need telling.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon, Rick.
My pleasure, Derek.
And I hope that the viewers have learned something today about Canadian history and the service of our men and women and what they have sacrificed. And hopefully, if you want to, I'll say it right out, if you want to visit these battlefields, please contact me. I will provide you with every bit of information and dates that we're going, and hopefully we can get as many Newfoundlanders and Canadians overseas to see what people sacrifice for us. So have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Derek.
Say hello to your family for me.
I will.
Okay, bye-bye.